the more I discovered the machinations that the international bankers go through to control us, the more I realized that the theft of our efforts, our resources, and our labors was phenomenal, was colossal. At that point, I got introduced to a graph that the Auditor General in Canada in 1993 put out, which showed the phenomenal theft that happens as a result of the power of interest and the sleight of hand economics of compounding interest. And I discovered this graph at that time, which I would like to show you here, of the degree of the theft that was taking place in Canada. Now, this is the Auditor General's report of November 1993, and here in Canada, this would put the sponsorship scandal to absolute shame. The sponsorship scandal does not compare with the theft that happens when a government, instead of borrowing from itself, creating its own money, which only the government has the right to create, they give it over to private entities like the international banks or the private banks. The government prints a bond, the private banks then turn that bond into printed dollars, and then the government borrows those printed dollars back according to the bond. And from way back, 1867 to 1992, when this report was prepared, Canada had to borrow for real spending no more than $37 billion. Yet in 1993, our national debt stood at $423 billion. $386 billion of that was simply interest on interest. Now, if this isn't an unnecessary theft, I don't know what is.
Do you realize, I think, GST alone collects more than that? Okay, we're talking in a country that has hundreds and hundreds of taxes. We got one tax alone that would cover the cost, the overcost of borrowing. Everything else is for what? For somebody else. Okay, and that is why they created this elaborate game to get money out of your pocket so it can go in theirs and keep you frustrated as there's nothing we can do. Okay, here's this other chart from Bill Abrams. I believe he's the one that put it together, and it's all sourced from Statistics Canada. It was a very good chart. And as I was listening to it and going through it, I started doing some research, chronological research as when events happen in life. And sometimes that allows us to get a really big picture of what's going on.
I was born in 1928, and I recall the Depression years. And the Bank of Canada was created, as I said, in 1934. The war started in 1939, and the government then was producing all the money that was needed to build the factories, to build the airplanes, and to build the ships.
Okay, 1942 was the middle of the World War II. Do you see any economic spike in our debt? Absolutely nothing. How are we able to finance a world war right in the middle of it without having an economic spike? Why? Because we borrowed it from ourselves without interest. Take a look further in history. 1944. We introduced the Family Allowance Program. There's a very nice humanitarian-based social program. Was there a spike in our debt? Absolutely none. How did we do it? Again, we borrowed it interest-free from our own bank. 1952, old age security. Very humanitarian. We've taken care of the children, we've taken care of the elderly. Old age security, 1952. Was there a spike? Absolutely none. Again, why? We borrowed it from ourselves interest-free to finance these programs. 1954, the St. Lawrence Seaway. Probably a multi-billion-dollar project. Was there a spike in our debt? Absolutely none. How did we do it? Again, because we can borrow from the Bank of Canada to fund infrastructures without placing ourselves into debt. Okay? 1966, the universal health care. Boom, where's the spike? Another humanitarian program. So between the St. Lawrence Seaway and this was this whole time frame that was just too much happening. Schools, universities, hospitals, everything. To develop a very strong humanitarian-based nation, and boom, no spike at all. Absolutely no spike. 1967, Canada Pension Plan was passed. In 1974, we have this increased pressure from the private bankers They wanted control. That's when Canada plugged into the G7. Come on, be part of the boys club. We'll take care of you. You know, forget about the people. They just, you know, they're sheep. You got to ask yourself, okay, the private bankers been around. This game has been around since, like I say, the U.S. got trapped by the private bankers in 1913. Why did they leave us alone for so many years? Because what they were doing was building their profit-making machine. Okay? Because they knew they were setting the stage. As much as we were more free, and as much as the money was keeping in our pocket, the trap was being set. Imagine what would happen if we could have kept those times going. But they knew what they were doing, and because we fell asleep. And so in '74, they started putting pressure on the government to take over the financing of the country. All the debts, all the bonds or whatever, the debts that we held to finance our country, creating no national debt, the banks, the private bankers started taking over those loans. And the second they took them over, they started adding interest to them. And there's the start of it. There's the reality of it. Okay, so after that point, government funding started coming from private banks at interest. That in itself is self-evident of the reality that can exist. Because right now we're living in the second part of that.